Hello and welcome back once again to After the Credits. Today we're talking about King Arthur, Legend of the Sword. So what did I think of King Arthur, Legend of the Sword? Honestly, I used to love King Arthur stories. It was one of my favorite legends. I used to watch just about everything King Arthur related. Disney's The Sword and the Stone was probably one of my favorite movies growing up. There were a lot of like Saturday morning cartoons or just like daily morning cartoons about King Arthur. One was about a group of football players that went back in time and became King Arthur and his knights. But there were a lot of them which kind of got me into medieval things, so there were other like medieval shows that I kind of liked. Obviously, the Renaissance fairs have become really popular with people. Things like Medieval Times exist. So all that to me, like my interest in that kind of stuff kind of stems from the Legend of King Arthur. Have I read all the books and everything about the whole search for the Holy Grail and Galahad and all that? No, I haven't. But I do know like the basics of what happens in the stories. There's also movies that do the King Arthur legend very well. Where with this one, Legend of the Sword, the movie was really poorly paced. It's like they were trying to cram so much of a story into it and they skipped over a lot of things and just like sped through a lot of other things. And it's like you could have spent a lot more time focusing your story instead of just jumping everywhere and probably actually made this a semi-decent film. So we start off with King Uther, which is Arthur's father. His kingdom is under siege by a dark mage. So Uther and his wife are running because the castle is at a loss. Everyone's kind of dead, so he's just trying to get his wife and kid out of the kingdom. Him and his wife end up dying, but he ends up getting Arthur onto a boat and sending him off, so Arthur kind of floats down the river until the boat washes up on the shore of the village, and he's discovered by the women of a brothel who are doing their laundry on the banks of the shore. And the boat washes up and they find a kid in there and they're like, oh, well, let's just take the kid in. So Arthur grows up in a brothel. So then it kind of speeds through his youth where he's just kind of like wandering around the streets doing nothing, kind of being a beggar, and then like him getting bullied by other kids, and then him eventually getting paid to help clean up this guy's martial arts training school. So he kind of like watches this and studies as he's cleaning and sort of learns how to fight that way. And then just like keeps speeding through his life where he's doing like all these other odd jobs. He becomes a pickpocket, him and a couple of friends that he finally makes. So he stockpiles all this money and he basically kind of forms his own little crime syndicate where he kind of controls the area. And he's kind of the protector of the brothel and people around the city, you know, people who have some shady businesses, they kind of rely on him. People who have honest businesses who are getting a shakedown, they kind of come to him and he takes care of it. So he's kind of established this whole network of people that he watches out for and that look up to him. And then years have gone by and the whole thing has kind of been forgotten about King Uther and everything because there's a new king who usurped the throne when Uther was killed. So then it turns out that there's the mythical Sword in the Stone, and it's been underwater for several years, and at one point the tide recesses and the Sword in the Stone rise up out of the water. So then it's like, okay, well, we know whoever can pull the sword from the stone is the rightful king, blah, blah, blah. So anyone of a certain age is then taken to the stone, and you get to try to pull the sword out. If you can't, you get a brand and like a shot of whiskey to dull the pain of the brand, and then you're sent back to whatever you were doing. And Arthur's running through the street one night because they're coming after him for some reason, and he runs into the palace guards, and they're like, what are you doing out? He goes, oh, I work on the ship. We ship out this morning. I'm on my way to the dock. And they're like, you're about the right age. Have you had your brand yet? And he's like, oh, I haven't had time. We just got back in from being out at sea, and now we're shipping right back out. So like, well, you're going to miss your boat because we're going to put you on the other one to go over and do the sword thing. He goes over to do the sword thing, and he kind of cuts through the line. He's like, this is bullshit. I got stuff to do. You know, let me try pull the sword out and send me back home or whatever. And he's the one who actually was able to pull the sword out. So they end up taking him prisoner because he pulled the sword out. So then the king is like, so you're my usurper? And he's like, I have no intention of usurping you. You know, just let me go. I'll go back to my privateering lifestyle and I won't bother you. You'll never hear from me again. And the king's like, no, you know, this is going to happen one way or another. And now that you pulled the sword, everyone's going to be looking to you. So I have to make an example of you. So he's going to be beheaded. And of course, Arthur's crew comes to the rescue. And then it just kind of jumps ahead again to Arthur building his army, finding all his knights that'll or what'll eventually be his Knights of the Round Table. And fast forwarding through all his training, he's not able to actually wield the sword, even though they have the sword in their possession. He's not able to wield it because every time he grabs it, he starts having these mental flashes of his history, and he doesn't want to relive his history, so he like fights against the sword and rejects it, so it always makes him collapse. At one point, when he's finally up against the wall and like all his friends are about to be killed, he finally says screw it and grabs the sword and just kind of becomes this whirlwind of sword fighting nightmare and like kills 100 people by himself. And they're like, you finally harnessed the power of the sword. And he's like, no, I didn't take control of the sword took control of me. Basically saying he was still fighting against it, but him and the sword mutually agreed that something needed to be done, so the sword kind of took over his body and wielded itself. So then it comes down to eventually he's got to fight the king. There's no way around it. And he finally gets to the point after a bunch more sporadic jump cuts that he needs to give into the sword. He needs to finally see what the sword's trying to show him. And once he does, he's able to wield the sword and he easily defeats the new king, and now he's King Arthur. And that's not a spoiler because it's King Arthur. You know he's going to become the king. So once the other king is defeated, King Arthur's the new king. He establishes his new kingdom. He names all of his new friends his knights and so on and so forth. And that's just kind of where it ends. It's like, okay, well, we could go more in depth into the story, but we'll save that for future endeavors. I don't think we'll ever see a sequel to this because it got kind of a poor reaction in theaters. Like, some people said they liked it, a lot of people said it was crap, and I can kind of see where both sides are coming from. There was potential for a good story there, but the way everything was paced in the movie, like they had so many montage jump cuts to cover time. It's like, okay, we gotta age him from like 5 to 20 in like 2 minutes, so let's just do this montage of his life for the next 20 years. And then it's like, okay, well, we gotta teach him how to fight, so let's do this montage training session where he's learning stuff. Okay, well, it's been months and he's been fighting against the sword, so let's do this montage of every time he's trying to wield the sword, he collapses, and then eventually he learns to deal with it. You know, they do like 3 or 4 of these montage things just to speed the movie along. And it's like, you could have just cut a lot of that out, did a simple explanation for how we got from point A to point B, and actually did a lot more with the actual story of the movie. But it's almost like they didn't have enough script to fill out a movie. And they're like, well, we could fill it with all the boring stuff. Well, no one's going to want to watch that. So let's speed through that really fast, and that'll pad out our movie to the time that we need. And I think had they just actually spent a little bit more time and redeveloped the story to better fit the movie, it probably would have done a lot better. But it is what it is, and it just wasn't that good of a film, honestly. I think King Arthur movies are kind of a dying niche. Like, they came out with another one not too long ago, and I don't remember anyone liking that one either. So it seems like the whole medieval thing might be dying out a little bit, or at least for King Arthur it is. Which is kind of sad because, like I said, growing up, King Arthur was one of my favorite stories. Just kind of sad to see it go away. It doesn't appeal to people the way it used to. So what would I give this one as far as a star rating? Honestly, sadly, I can say I enjoyed watching Snatch more than I enjoyed watching this one. And Snatch, I said, was kind of crap to begin with. Do I feel this deserves a lower rating than Snatch, though, is the question. And even though I enjoyed watching Snatch more, that story was really just kind of underdeveloped as well. And I do like the folklore of King Arthur. It still holds a nostalgic spot for me. So I don't feel I can really bump this one below Snatched, but I'm going to give it the same rating as Snatched and give it a 2.5. It's not a middle-of-the-road film by any means. It's honestly really poorly paced, and they could have done a lot better with it, but I don't think it deserves to be rated a 2 or lower, especially since if I was going to rate this a 2, I would have to reevaluate my rating of Snatched, because even though I wasn't bored watching Snatched, it was still a dumber story, where this one actually was something I'm used to, if any of that makes sense to you guys as far as like how I'm trying to rate this. So I don't feel comfortable knocking this down to a 2, so it's going to be tied at a 2.5. That's about it for this one. Nothing more to say about it than that. So again, as always, thank you guys for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, share the video. Links are in the description. Click the bell up there in the corner. Make sure you get notifications every time I post new content. And until next time, I'll see you after the credits.